The purpose of this series is to get you what I refer to as a hybrid bow. A lot of times, if I'm not in competitive archery and not shooting a target-oriented bow, I like to convert my hunting bow into a summer target style bow just to see how accurate I can be, and it also allows me to have much more reps. So the first thing that we're going to have to do with that is going to be reduce that weight. Reducing your draw weight does a number of things. One, it has way less wear and tear on your body, and it allows you so much more for repetition. It also allows you to maybe set that bow down for a little bit longer period of time, pick it back up, and pick up where you left off. Now, there's a number of ways to reduce your poundage on your bow. Obviously, the one that most people know of is simply taking a limb bolt and backing out the limb bolts to reduce the poundage on the limbs. However, once you reduce that down to a certain point, you really start to minimize the string tension, which later relates in a loss of accuracy, because as that arrow is going forward on that string, the less tension that you have on the string, the more that arrow is going to pull that string forward as it goes, especially if your nock fit isn't perfect. And the other thing too is you'll start to notice that you will have a little bit more string oscillation or vibration in that system. So I'm a huge fan of either getting a bow that has lower peak weight or go ahead and making the investment to swap out the limbs. I'm going to show you how to swap out limbs on my particular bow, this PSE. And I'm also going to give you a quick talk about some of the things you can do for other types of brands for that as well. But before we do that, the first thing that you should do to take your hunting rig and make a few changes to it so it becomes a target rig or a training rig is you're going to need to remove the accessories from your setup. So I start out taking the stabilizer off, that shorter stabilizer. I'm going to remove this 5-pin sight that I have as well. And I'm also going to remove the arrow rest, just because if I've been hunting with this, there's a good chance I might want to just make sure the string tension's good. Also, if I've used it for a hunting season, I think it's smart to replace your launcher blades if you're going to stay with that style, which we'll talk about later on, or also just replacing that cord that you have for either a limb driven style rest or your cable driven style rest. So I'm just going to remove all of this off the bow. And once that happens, I'll show you just how easy it is to swap out limbs on a model like this PSE. I've got my bow in the press, and a few basics for a bow press knowledge are going to be: make sure you have your inside post at the pivot point of the limb. You've got your wheels pushing right in line with those axles so that we're only flexing the limbs and we're not bending the riser. That's critical. So from there, we're going to go ahead and press this, and I do have videos out there on how to press a bow properly, which you can find. But the first thing I'm going to do is remove the strings and cables. And when you do this, don't let any of the twists out of your strings and cables. Really important. So as I'm doing this, I'm actually holding this end the exact same as I would if it was on the bow, and I'm going to hook them right back here on these hooks that I have on the back. There's several different ways to do it. This works really slick. This is actually 2 magnets or 1 mag clip that I've split in half, stuck a half on each side of this press, and then put just a little shower ring or clip ring just like that in there so that you can put your strings and cables right here on the back of the press. Works really well. So took my string off. Now I'm going to remove my cables. One thing I would recommend highly, if you haven't done this, is either have someone with you that has, take a lot of pictures, take pictures of what that cam looks like before. Make sure you take note of, right here, like this top cable, for example. goes on the inside of that other cable. Those are things that you should take note of. And just remember, you always want to make sure you understand where those strings are going on the cables. The pictures can do wonders for you being able to look at it, understanding that. Also, don't be afraid to have someone that knows how to do this be there with you to show you how to do this for the first time. Or 100%, there's always the option to taking your setup in and having your local dealer change out your limbs for a different poundage. So I've got the string off, and now I've got both of the cables off. So from here, I'm already ready to let this press all the way down until this is able to come out, and we'll replace the limbs over on the table. We've got our bow out of the press, so now what we're going to do is we're going to remove the cams, also remove the limbs out of this system. One of the things I think would make this really easy for you is to take a look down here at your limbs, and you're going to see a bunch of numbers. For the PSEs, that bottom number is significant to a certain type of poundage, but the top number is almost like a micro adjustment of that deflection, the limb deflection. So what you'll notice on this particular one, because as you pull the cables to the side of your bow, it puts slightly different pressure on those limbs. So you're going to notice that even though the bottom number is the same, that micro number is slightly different on each one of these limbs. And so when you have your new limbs, I'd recommend flipping all those over, and you're going to see the same sort of thing. So for example here, all these are a number 10, which represent about 65 pounds of peak weight, which is what I want. It's 10 pounds less than I normally shoot. And then there's some other numbers here at the top representing the other thing. So when I look on here, I see that for sure the heaviest ones are going to be on the inside of my riser. So what I'm going to do, just to make sure I'm doing all this the right way, is I'm actually just going to put those on my mat in that same order. So I'm going to spin those around just like that. Just look at which ones are closest, put them on my mat just like this. This is what's awesome about these bench mats that we have. So from there, I know when I put these back in this bow, I know exactly how I want them to go. So now I can try to just push down on these limbs and see if they come out of that pocket. Chances are, if they're locked in really tight, you might have to slightly loosen these side bolts that are holding the rockers into place. So I'll loosen that a little bit and then try to get my limb out of there. Needs to get a little bit looser. Okay, so those limbs will now come out of there just like that. I'm going to do the same thing on the top and the bottom. Remove those limbs. But again, keeping your other limbs spread out just like they would be on your bow is going to help you remember where all this stuff goes. So obviously we've got our riser. We want to make sure that all of the different parts that are on this limb pocket are still in there. So you can see on this particular pocket that PSE has, there's some small little press-in spacers that are on the outside here, and everything else looks pretty much intact. Haven't lost any parts, which is awesome. So now we're going to set that riser to the side, and we're going to bring our limbs here in the center. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take an E-clip tool just like this, and we'll find an E-clip tool that fits that E-clip exact, and we'll remove this E-clip that's holding the axle in that limb. And again, we've already laid out our limbs here, so this is an awesome way to know you're doing it right, especially if you're a beginner. So this is my bottom limb. That's how it would sit on the bow. I'm looking down at these other limbs, thinking of how they'd sit on the bow. So the best thing you can do is take that E-clip, set it on the outside, because I just took it off that side. So now I'm gonna remove this axle, and I'm going to slide this cam off just like this. And I've got a thick washer and a thin washer. I've also got a thin washer on that side. So what you can do is set your washers down there. Got the thin and the thick there, the thin here. Cam's going to be in the middle. I'm going to remove that axle out. So now I'm going to put this axle back in there. And then we're just going to go with the same thing that we just did. So I need thick. I need my cam, just the same direction I took it off. I'm going to put the other washers on there, just like that. Put my other limb on. And from there, I'm just going to take my E-clip, set my E-clip back there on that limb, and clip that all the way in just like that, and we've got our limb swap done. So now all I'd have to do is take this riser, again making sure, depending on that limb pocket system, you kind of loosen those rocker bolts would be important. Making sure your rocker pads are straight. You don't want these tilting one way or another. That limb has to sit flat on there. And then putting that limb all the way in and pushing it down just like that. So you can see my limb has some holes here on the insides of these pockets that those limbs will sit into. Like I said, it also had two small pads, both on the outside and the inside, that take up all that slop. And once you've done that, you can tighten up that pocket just like that. And this limb is going to sit in there and wait for you to go ahead and do the same thing to this opposite side. Once I get that, we'll go back in the press for the restring. We've got the bow back in the press, so now we're going to pick up right where we left off. First thing you want to do is put your cables on, and you can see I've got the Nock on logos pointed in the center. I'm going to roll that Nock on down towards the limb a little bit, and I'm going to hook both of these cables yokes on there, and I'm going to roll this, make sure that it's on the inside track first, then going out to that outside track just like that. Make sure my cable, the harness, everything's right. And then I'm going to utilize one of these little clips like this as a holder and just let that hold itself right there. Now I'm going to do the same thing again down here on the bottom cam. So I'm going to take my yoke again, and I'm going to tip the Nock on logo down. Going to hook on those posts just like that. Then I'm going to roll that cam the opposite way. Make sure my cables are on the inside track first, then go into the outside track just like that. Take your holder, clip that on there. From there, we can take your main cable, and we're going to hook this down here on this bottom cam on that cable post. Remember, our top cam was running on the inside, so we've got our bottom solid cable post coming from the yoke. This is going to go on the inside of that other one. Go down the inside, hook on the cam. We can remove our clips. These are our temporary little holders. And then from there, you can take your string off. You can see exactly how that string was sitting on that cam before. I'm gonna go ahead and put this string on here. Just like this. Gonna remove this side, pull it tight, put some tension on that, just like that. You can see I'm putting tension on, my peep's facing the right way, so I haven't lost any twists in that string at all. So I'm gonna go ahead and string this bottom one up, just like this. Get it on there. Make sure both my strings are in that track, good. And from here, what's really critical is take your finger, start where you hooked every single cable or every single string up, and just follow it around that cam and make sure it's in that track all the way. So I went around this way, I'm gonna go around that way, do the same thing here on my string, knowing I'm in my string track the whole way, also in my string track whole way, cable 1 all the way, the other side of the cable all the way. And from there, you can let the pressure off of this press. And we still have to put my cable slider on, but you can see just like that, I've done a full limb swap. It's actually only taken a few minutes. Peep still facing back the right way. I'm good to go. So I'm gonna put on my cable slide here in a minute and show you how this thing looks. Down to the final steps here, putting my limb dampeners back in these limbs, and I highly recommend you making sure you have both of them in the same place depending on what type of bow you have. For this particular Evo NTN, putting them right in line with the back of the Evo and right before that N, but you can see this thing looks awesome, starting to look a little bit like a target bow, which is fun for the summer. And last thing I'm going to do is go ahead and make sure I tighten down these limb bolts all the way, and just to see what my peak poundage is. And a lot of times if you're doing this, you might want to take a few turns off those limb bolts before you start this process, especially if you're pressing it, just so you don't have so much pressure on the limbs when you press. From there, let's see how good we did this job. This was 75 pounds when we started. Oh yeah, that feels good. We're right at 64.9 pounds. So this is going to be an awesome hybrid for me. So I want to talk about a few other things depending on the type of bow that you're shooting. For example, with the Hoyts, limb change, very, very similar. Really, the main difference is going to be that your top cam has a single cable track, not a double. And then also your yoke goes to the outside of the limb. So if you follow that same protocol, and when you're taking this apart, removing that E-clip, setting one part to the side, just like we did. Lay out your new limbs, set your bow in the center. As you break it down, lay everything just to the outside of it. Makes it super, super easy. With Matthews, they wanted me to say they highly recommend just taking this to a dealer, having the dealers do any type of maintenance like this or putting in the bow press. However, on some of their newer models, they do have some options that allow you to change some modules, which also easily changes that peak weight, which is a really cool feature. But depending on your skill level, again, you can go to an archery shop, let them do it. I just think having limbs that are a peak weight that allow you to have that summertime practice or let you have that heavier weight for your hunting season, I think it's an awesome option. It's definitely a lower cost investment. If you're a little bit handy in a bow press and you can lay things out like I did on the mat, put them back together, this limb swap in total really only took maybe 5 minutes. So 75 pounds is 65 pounds. First step of converting over to the hybrid complete.